From water babies to the Bear Lake Monster, Southeast Idaho has plenty of local legends. Hear about them here on Speaking of Spirits. Hi, everybody. This is Colleen with Speaking of Spirits, and I'm here with Kelly.
Hello, everybody.
And one of our viewers reached out to us and asked us to do local legends. And in particular, one of the stories is the water babies.
Yeah, the water babies. Yeah. When I was growing up, that was a local legend. I didn't hear about it until about high school. Someone brought it up, and I'm like, what are water babies? And somebody's like, oh, you've never heard the legend? I'm like, no, I've never heard the legend. And someone was telling me that they're little, I guess, scaly fish people that are about the size of anywhere to 3-year-olds or something like that. And they live in the waterways out in the Fort Hall bottoms around the Snake River and places like that. And they let out cries, like baby cries in the night. And if you hear them, you leave that area immediately.
So didn't it start with, it was a particularly couple of hard years, either
Yes.
drought or severe winters, and the Native Americans that lived out here couldn't take care of they couldn't find enough food for their babies.
Yes,
their children.
There's a couple of different accounts, and one is that the Shoshone tribe here at the time were running into a particularly severe year of famine. There wasn't enough food to go around. And one of the stories is to save the infants and small children of suffering, starvation. The mothers would take them to a local waterway and drown them. And they believe that they didn't die. They transformed into small fishes and would swam away. And when they would grow up, they grew up into water nymphs or spirits.
Yeah.
And they would play in the waterways. But if anybody was dumb enough to get near their playground or waterway, they would drown them, essentially.
Yeah. So it's, an incredibly sad story of what happens during times of struggle like that, where the parents felt that it was better for the children to die than to starve. And, God, what a horrific choice to have to make. But these babies, apparently people who have heard them and seen them said that they try to lure people into the water, and that they would try to drown them. Now, this is on the Snake River. The Snake River is a really big river, and it runs through the reservation here, through Fort Hall. And a lot of people do drown in the Snake River. It's a lot of people every year drown in this river.
Yeah, and the Snake River doesn't give up her dead easily. And if she wants you, she'll take you.
Yeah. So the water baby legend is that they try to lure people into these areas down by the bottoms. They call it the bottoms, where it's kind of a flood zone down there when the Snake River on the reservation, when the Snake River is really full, it'll flood out. And, there's a lot of wildlife down there, and it's really quite beautiful, but it's also very deadly. And you can hunt down there if you get a permit through the tribes. You can go hunting and you can run cattle down there and stuff. But so people who have gone down there, and I don't know if they're trespass fishing or what they're doing, but they hear this and it's almost like a siren song, like they want to be lured into the water.
Yeah. When I was growing up, I was told, if you're fishing out there, if you got permission to eat, you have to have permission to be on the bottoms. But if you find yourself in the bottoms and it starts getting dark, someone told me a trick that if you look at the top of the ridge and you put 4 fingers above like this and like this, and the ridge of the hill is here and the sun is here, you got about 2 hours to get out of there because each finger is a half an hour. So then I was always told to never be on the bottoms at night because weird stuff goes down.
Yep.
So,
yeah. And I hear from a lot of my friends who are Native American who live on the reservation that a lot of things go down in the bottoms at night. And some of it's human. I mean, it's not good stuff.
I was going to say, it's not always
stuff.
supernatural. There's always going to be, there could be people or monsters.
They sure are. So that's one of the legends. And I always thought it was, I heard about it as soon as I moved to Pocatello. I thought, wow, that's quite interesting, you know. So I started reading on it. There isn't a whole lot of real documentation on it, so I don't know if it's just an urban legend or not.
Well, I did come across an article that a gentleman did. He went out, and this isn't local. This is out by Reno in a place called Pyramid Lake, and he was going to go out there and do some fishing. He was just a writer, you know. He wrote articles for a magazine, and he went out there, and I guess something happened, and he got the day off, and they're like, "Well, you're out here. What are you going to do?" And he's like, "I'm going to go fishing in Pyramid Lake." And his friend was like, "No, don't do that." And he's like, "Well, why?" And she's like, "The water babies." He's like, "What the heck are water babies?" And she's like, "It's a local legend, but people go out there, people do disappear, stuff goes down." And I started digging into it, and it's in Sparks, Nevada, on the Paiute Indian Reservation. It's a huge lake. It's 350 feet deep, with caves and structures and all sorts of stuff. And apparently, the winds out there can whip up and be so strong they can knock over a boat. And lots of people out there disappear. Lots of people have said encounters with strange things out there. There was a story of these guys camping on the shores of a lake, and one of their friends heard a baby cry coming from the lake. So he's like, I got to go out there. I got to go check it out and see what it is. And everybody's like, no, don't do that. Don't do that. And he started swimming out there and swimming. And the more he swam out there, the further the cry got out into the lake. And eventually, you know, everybody else is on shore, and they're like, he'll come back. He'll come back. An hour goes by. Another hour. He still hasn't swam back to shore. And they waited till morning. They went out and looked for him, and he was gone. So, yeah, there was a lot of stories coming out of Pyramid Lake, even though that isn't local, but I found it interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting, and it kind of leads to that maybe the Fort Hall water babies are, maybe it's not just a legend, maybe it really happened. So we have other sites that we're going to share in this podcast. So you went and started digging into Yellowstone?
Yes.
I want to hear some of those.
I found, okay. So there is a place in Yellowstone, everybody knows, it's the Old Faithful Inn. And one of the ghost stories out there is called the Widow's Walk. And about 1890, when the Old Faithful Inn was built, there was a young married couple that rented a room. And I found out stuff later, but a newlywed couple were staying there, And what should have been a joyous occasion turned to murder real quick. There was a huge argument between the husband and the wife. The husband stormed out and he left, and he just up and disappeared. Nobody knew where he went. And so 3 days had passed. They didn't see hide or hair of the bride that was there. Hotel staff went up there to check, and they found her in the bathroom, completely beheaded. And just her headless corpse was in the bathroom.
So he took her head?
So they searched the area, they did their thing, they searched the area. They found her head in the crow's nest on top of the building up there. And as the story goes, at the stroke of midnight, you can see her walk down from the crow's nest, down the hallway, go to her room, and then disappear before she goes into her room.
Wow.
And she's got her head underneath one of her arms as she's walking around.
That's creepy.
Now, later on, who is it? I guess the doorman or somebody that was working at the hotel made that whole story up, and it stuck. Yeah, he did it. He did it
so
to
that's
bring
crazy.
people in with a creepy ghost story.
They have a problem getting people at the Old Faithful Inn. It's really spectacular. But,
yeah. But there is another story of a couple staying there, and in room 2, a lady wakes up in the middle of the night, and there's a woman standing at the end of her bed, a ghostly shroud, the ghostly shrouded, typical ghost standing at the foot of your bed, watching you while you're sleeping. And she wakes up, she sees this, and she grabs her husband and does the, kind of thing. She's got her fingernails embedded in his shoulder. And they wake up the next day and they check out. And they're like, oh, well, how's your sleep? And she's like, probably has that look of, don't even ask me. And her husband's like, I don't know, tell me. And he's got claw marks in his shoulder. So that's that one. And then I found a couple of ones, and I thought maybe Decon might like this one. It's called the Zone of Death. I stumbled across this years and years ago, and
is this the area where there's no jury? They can't do jury.
Yes. This is the Zone of Death is a 50 square mile area in Yellowstone where essentially anybody can get away with murder. And this was found out by accident by a law professor named Brian C. Kalt. He wondered if there was an area anywhere in the world where somebody could commit a horrific crime and there's not enough people to get a jury, and it's too far away from any courthouse or something like that. So he was trying to find a loophole in the 6th Amendment. And he found it.
Yep. So specifically what it is that there's no population. So this is that 50 square miles is a county. And there's no population within it. So because you have to be tried by a jury of your peers, and there's no population there isn't a way to have a jury trial.
Right. And
so
anything that happens, and the other side of that is that anything that happens in Yellowstone, on the Yellowstone side, that becomes federal. It's not state.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So so there's 2 conflicts going on. One, if you commit it out there, you're going to be tried federally, but there's not enough people to form a jury.
Yeah.
And you're in the middle of nowhere. So you are guaranteed in the Constitution to have a speedy trial by a jury of your peers. Well, it's
No,
the
that's
middle of
not happening,
nowhere.
though. Yeah.
It's the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And
So this is interesting, and this is factual. It's not legend. There is the zone of death. Now, if you watch the show Yellowstone at all, the Kevin Costner show Yellowstone,
I
right?
haven't. I've caught
Oh
like
my
little
God, it's so
snippets
good.
of
But
it.
anyway, that's where they dispose of all the bodies, as they throw them off a cliff in the zone of death, because there's, I mean, it's like the body dump. It's kind of interesting that they brought it into the story, the Yellowstone. So, So, what other legend did you have?
I did stumble across this was years and years ago, but I swear something. This is a real thing, but there's a skywalk bridge above. I think it's either the upper falls or the lower falls of the Yellowstone River, and people that go and walk that bridge are almost compelled to jump over the side. It's kind of like a siren song out there. And apparently, one year it got so bad, like maybe 3 or 4 people jumped off the bridge and into the falls, into the river, and died, that the Forest Service eventually closed that bridge and they never opened it again.
Yeah, that's nuts. So, yeah, that's
but
crazy.
I did come across the story of 2 Native American men that were getting away from something. They stole some horses. They're trying to get away. They're in a canoe. They're trying to go over the falls, and they didn't make it. But people that visit the lower part of the falls say they can hear drumming and chanting at the bottom of it, which is strange.
Yeah, that is weird. If you've been to the falls at Yellowstone, they're so massive and it's so loud. That would be kind of incredible to hear. So, yeah. So I've got a couple more local to Pocatello stories for you. One is we've gotten numerous calls about a phantom person walking off of Siphon or Rio Vista roads. Yeah, so it's like right on the reservation, just on that borderline of the reservation areas, and that if you're traveling at night, and it was funny because one of the stories came from a guy that was my insurance agent for a number of years, and he called me because he knew this is what I do, and so he called me. He goes, "Man," he goes, I think I'm going nuts. I saw this phantom, like, he goes, at first I thought it was a regular person just walking in. It was so cold. It was winter and it was below zero. And he's like, God, I got to give this person a ride. They're going to freeze to death before they get to where they're going. So he kind of pulls over. And when he offers, he looks to behind, because he pulled in front to then stop to offer this person a ride. And he looks back behind him. There's no one there. And I've had more than one call. It's either male or female. There doesn't seem to be. It can vary, but this phantom walker out right on the border of the reservation, and I don't know if it's a Native American person or no. I don't have that much detail on, but other than it always happens in the winter when it is incredibly cold, and people stop and to offer a ride, and there's never anyone there.
Yeah. It sounds like a Resurrection Mary type of story.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, but it would make sense that maybe somebody was walking home on a really cold winter's eve and kind of died, and that's what they get to do for the rest of eternity.
Well, people who don't live in Idaho, maybe some of our watchers, listeners who are maybe more in southern United States, they don't understand how cold it can get here. Like last year in my barn, it was the coldest since I've lived here. I've been here like 14 years. We hit minus 38.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's cold. Not Montana cold. That's a whole other side of cold. But it's cold. You will die from exposure very quickly. So you have to be really careful out here in the winter. So I have another story though. This one was really, really interesting because I dug into it and I found, wow, this is a bizarro story. Okay. So there was a lawman called Big Dave Updike. Did you ever?
Yep.
Okay.
I know this one.
Yeah. Well, there's a twist to this though, because of the call that I got so I'm going to give the background. Big Dave Updike was a really interesting character. He's an Old West guy. He lives for some time actually in Yuba County, California. Very familiar with that. He did a lot of stuff, right? I mean, this is the 1800s. So he comes back up to Idaho, 1864. He is elected as sheriff of Ada County, which is Boise. But he was always had his hand in some kind of shady stuff. So he's he steals some stuff. He's allegedly stole like a bag of gold dust that's still missing. And allegedly he hid it in the City of Rocks.
It was more than just gold dust.
Well, I know, but that's where the story was like, that's like his first shady dealings was gold dust, but then it got bigger. And then he started robbing stagecoaches and he had like this posse of guys. They would go out and they would commit horrible crimes. And so they were stealing stuff, guns, gold, jewelry, and all that. They had caches of stuff kind of hid all over the place. Well, he made it into Pocatello. And there's a place in Pocatello when you're headed south on Interstate 15 called the Gap. And the Gap is where Pocatello ends and Income begins. There's a gap in the mountain. And it's kind of interesting because the weather at the Gap gets more severe. It's just the way the weather patterns happen there. So there's this narrow area where the highway goes through and you have the train track. And I get a call one night from a gentleman who is a long haul truck driver, but he lives in Pocatello. So he's coming and going all the time through Pocatello to get his loads. Because, I don't know if he owns his own truck, but he comes through a lot and he tends to drive the Gap. Usually by the time he's coming and going, it's really late at night, early morning, like that midnight, real late. So he tells me that he's headed south on Interstate 15 and it's snowing and there's no traffic. So it's really late. He says there's very little traffic because the storm's pretty intense and it's cold and windy. And he goes, there's no other tracks on the highway in front of me. He goes, it's just me and my big rig. And he gets down almost right in front of Century High School, which is right before the Gap. We have a high school that borders the freeway. And he sees a man walking on the freeway in the middle of both lanes, like right down the center line, because you can't see, it's all snowing. You couldn't see center line anyway. And he's like, what? My God. And he said his first thought was, am I seeing things? And then his second thought was, this is an old man. Is he, like Alzheimer and he's walked away from his home and he's going to die out here. It's so cold. He's going to die. And he said he described him as having a cowboy hat on and a duster. Now, if you're familiar with dusters, they're very long coats so that when you're sitting in the saddle, they're split down the back so you can bring that coat over your legs. And they're oil skin so that they're water repellent, right? So they're very warm, but they're not common. I mean, people who ride horses a lot and work outside a lot with livestock still use them, but they're not a common part of attire. So he's like, well, that's interesting. So he goes, I need to pull over and help this guy out, or at least call 911 and let him know what's going on, And he said he wasn't going very fast, like maybe 20 miles an hour because the storm was so bad. So he comes to a stop because there's no other traffic. It's no other traffic. Like the freeway shut down from the storm. And So he comes, and he had passed the guy very slowly, pulled the rig over, and he said he gets out of his rig and he walks behind it, the truck now, to go talk to the gentleman because he's past him. And he goes, there's no one there. There's no one there. And he goes, I thought, oh my God, did he fall down the side of the highway? Because it's really steep right there.
Yeah.
And he goes down to the train tracks. He goes, did he come behind me? And when I was pulling past him, and did he go over to the side of the highway somehow and just it slip and fall down the side? So he goes, I ran over to the side and I've got my flashlight out. And he goes, there's no one there. And I called and there's no one there. And he goes, and then I started looking in the snow and there were no footsteps whatsoever. There's no tracks of this gentleman who has been walking in the snow on the freeway. He goes, there's no tracks. And he goes, I walked up and down. He goes, there's no cars, there's no tracks, there's only my tire tracks, there's no footprints.
Okay. Was he on the interstate part or below? Oh, so
no, he was on the interstate.
Was he going south or is he coming north?
South.
Okay.
Going south.
So for the listeners that don't know, Pocatello and part of Inkom is on a fault line, and they built the interstate heading south. If you don't know, you can walk over by the interstate and look over the side, and it's a good, 60, 50-foot drop straight down?
Yeah.
And it's all lava rock.
Yeah, it's these basalt blocks that are natural from the lava flows, right? You have all this basalt and from eons ago, and they built the freeway right on top of this basalt. So it's just a straight down drop.
Yeah.
So I don't know how high it is, but it's pretty high. But anyway, so he says he walks up and down. He goes, I was really rattled. He goes, I didn't know what to do. He goes, I was really scared. He goes, did I run over this man? Was the second thought. So he's underneath the truck looking. Did somehow he get tangled up in my, wheels? And so he's crawling all around trying to find this man. He goes, but the thing was, there's no tracks. It's like he didn't exist. And then he got back in his truck and he continued to drive because he goes, I don't know what else to do. There was no one there. There's no one there.
Yeah, so what can you do?
Right. So he got down to Salt Lake City and he called his friend and woke him up. And he said his friend's like, not happy that he gets woken up so early in the morning, but he says, I got to tell you what happened. And his friend said, oh, well, that was Big John Updike or Big Dave Updike. And he goes, what are you talking about? And he goes, well, apparently he had robbed a stagecoach. This is years ago before the interstate, right? You're talking horses and wagons. There was a path through there, a road through there. And Dave Updike and his gang of thugs was robbing stagecoaches in Pocatello. And that was one of the places that he had robbed a stagecoach. Now, I think he was eventually taken back to Ada County and hanged.
Yep, he was tried and executed. Yes.
So why his spirit would be here in Pocatello is interesting, but...
I know.
Do you know?
Okay, I know. His treasure's still here. Him and his gang robbed a stagecoach, and it went south. They managed to get away with some gold bars and some gold dust. And one of his gang members hitched it to some horses and buried it somewhere in Robber's Roost. Nobody's found it yet. If they have, they're not spilling the beans. But somewhere in Robber's Roost is a cache of gold bars and gold dust. So he's probably still looking for it.
Man alive. So I thought that was interesting. I found that the guy who told me the story sounded really credible. I mean, he called me. I started writing the notes down as soon as he called. I questioned him. You can usually tell when somebody's giving you kind of a BS story because they're trying to make up. If you keep going backwards in the story and asking them to clarify, if it's a BS made up story, they can't because they're too far along in the rest of the lie. they can't go backwards. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And every time I went back to question him on different things, he was right on it. And I just found him credible. He says, I'm not going to give you my name because he goes, I just find this, he said, this happened to me and I just have to tell you guys. So I thought it was interesting. Anyway, I had not heard about that legend. And then I get this call out of the blue a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Pocatello has a real interesting history of outlaws. When people think the Wild West, they think Tombstone, stuff like that. And I'm like, no. Pocatello was the Wild West. There was a lot of stuff going on. I mean, did you hear about Butch Cassidy's treasure that's just hidden just up the road from there in McCammon somewhere? I mean, Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid, Billy the Kid, all of them used to run through here all the time.
Yeah. So anyway, I thought this was a good episode. I don't know. Did you have any other stories, Kelly?
Well, when you said local, I didn't know how local, but remember our Dogman episode that we did?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. I found a story out of Idaho Falls about a werewolf that was roaming the cemetery there in Rose Hill. And there was, I guess, way back when, before Idaho Falls was really big, there were some really gnarly murders that was going on in Idaho Falls. And apparently it was done by a werewolf. People have seen it. And the town got together. They found it in the cemetery, shot it, killed it, thought they killed it, cut it in half, and buried it both parts in separate graves. One was marked Ware, and another one was marked Wolf. They thought it was done and over with. Come back a couple days later, the graves are open, and the headstone that said Wolf on it had a huge bite taken out of it. That was the local legend. But somebody recently said that they'd seen the same thing out in the graveyard out there. And that was, her 60s, early 60s? I can't remember. But that's that local legend. And then we have the Bear Lake Monster.
Oh, yeah, the Bear Lake Monster.
So, yeah, the Native Americans would tell tales of a Loch Ness monster type creature in Bear Lake that would scoop up men and women that wandered too close to shore. And then the Mormons came around and they picked up the story and they spread it around. And eventually, Brigham Young heard about it and he offered up a ton of rope and stuff to hunt this monster down, which it didn't come to fruition. But
so is the Bear Lake Monster kind of like Loch Ness?
Has
people seen this? Okay, so it's
people have claimed to see it, have seen it. There's an account of a guy that was a hermit that was living on the shores of Bear Lake, and one day he went out and he started playing some music, and the Bear Lake Monster decided to come out of the waters and wander up on shore and have a little shindig with him while he played the fiddle. It would dance and stuff like that. And then once he's like, okay, I'm done. It wandered back into the water, and that's where it stayed. So I guess
bananas.
People have seen it, but if you grew up in Idaho, you've heard of these lake monsters. What was there? There's one in Caldwell. Was it Caldwell? Anyway, it's over by the Boise area, but Penderell and Coeur d'Alene. There's been reports of giant lake monsters.
Yeah. I think that goes with, the legends, I think that goes with any body of deep water that's really popular. People believe that there's something in there, right? So
yeah, and then
yeah.
And then eventually they go, well, I've seen it. And you're like, okay. Evidence, proof. You got a phone in your
Well,
pocket.
yeah, but again, evidence and proof of some of the other topics that we deal with. So it's funny because our minds, and I do the same thing, pick and choose what we believe in, and yeah, that's kind of an interesting phenomenon with the human brain that we can do that. We'll say, oh well, I believe in this but not that, and I wrestling right now with Sasquatch because of stuff we've been talking about lately. And so yeah, anyway, I think keep an open mind, but legends, I think there's usually a kernel of truth in a legend. Something really happened, somebody really saw something, but they take on a life of their own. So anyway, if any of our listeners have any local Idaho stories or seen anything anywhere, I want to know about it. Shoot us a message, shoot us an email. Like and subscribe. We really need your help. We're almost there to monetize our podcast. We're so excited. We're so close. You guys can really help us out in the community. And we keep trying to bring you content. We have a bunch of different stuff going on our channel. We have Mark he's starting to do his trucker off-ramp stories. We have the girls that are podcasting. We're going to have a whole other shorts coming on. We're going to do a lot of stuff. So,
yeah, trying to put a new twist on old stories.
You bet. Well, thanks everybody, and we hope you enjoyed this podcast. Signing off.
You've been listening to Speaking of Spirits, powered by Pocatello Paranormal Research in Pocatello, Idaho. Thank you for joining us today. We're glad you could be here. If you're enjoying the podcast, please do us a favor and go to whatever platform you are listening to the podcast on and give us a review. We prefer the 5-star reviews. This helps us know how we're doing, and it helps others to find the podcast. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you on our next podcast.